Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Basics, the series where we take Airfix kits beyond standard assembly and focus on precision fit, structural accuracy and refined finishing techniques. In this series we are building the Airfix 1/24 scale Supermarine Spitfire Mk.IXc in the distinctive Flying Dray configuration. This version represents an aircraft adapted after the D-Day landings to deliver beer barrels to forward troops. To reproduce this unusual role, the kit includes several unique components in addition to the standard Spitfire structure. These include a resin slipper tank, resin bomb racks with associated fittings, and resin barrels with separate end caps. The streamlined fairings fitted to the front of the barrels are believed to be modified P-51 Mustang drop tanks, intended to reduce drag in flight. This kit also includes pre-cut canopy masks, which are a very welcome addition during the finishing stages. Also included in each order of this kit is a Flying Dray pint glass. We will install all of the Flying Dray equipment later in the build. Because this is a large and highly detailed kit, the project will be divided into several episodes. In part 1 we will complete the entire cockpit and fuselage interior up to the point where the fuselage halves can be joined and aligned. Later parts will cover the wing, armament, flying surfaces and finally the Flying Dray external equipment. Before starting assembly, it's important to understand how this model is engineered. The Spitfire cockpit forms a structural tube that determines the alignment of the fuselage halves and ultimately the fit of the wing. If this cockpit structure sits even slightly too low or misaligned, it will cause problems later, particularly with wing fit and fuselage closure. This kit is engineered with very tight tolerances. Fit issues that some builders encounter are usually caused by two factors: either minor misalignment during cockpit assembly, or paint thickness accumulating on mating surfaces. Paint films may seem insignificant, but in a tightly engineered model they can prevent parts seating fully. The key to success with this kit is therefore simple: careful preparation, clean mating surfaces, and repeated dry fitting before glue is applied. When built accurately, the model fits exceptionally well. The primary structural elements of the cockpit are the side frames, bearers and bulkheads. These parts form the load-bearing tube inside the fuselage. After removing the parts from the sprues, all edges should be cleaned thoroughly. Any seam lines or sprue remnants must be removed so that every contact surface is smooth and flat. It's also beneficial to lightly chamfer the hidden edges of the cockpit frames. These edges are not visible once installed, and the slight bevel helps the parts settle fully into their locating grooves. This improves alignment and reduces the chance of interference during fuselage closure. To prevent paint interfering with fit, it is helpful to mask the locating grooves and structural contact areas before painting. This avoids the need to scrape paint away later and keeps joints clean and precise. The smaller lower bearers are less critical structurally, but still require proper cleanup and alignment during assembly. At this stage, the cockpit framework can be dry assembled to confirm the basic structure aligns correctly inside the fuselage halves. The first bulkhead can now be glued into the cockpit floor assembly. When positioning this bulkhead, it's good practice to temporarily place the fuselage sides around the structure to confirm alignment before applying adhesive. The pivot support for the rudder pedals can also be installed at this stage. Another bulkhead carries the rudder bar. The locating holes for this part are quite tight, and once painted they can scrape paint from the rudder bar shaft. Lightly drilling these holes improves fit and prevents damage to painted surfaces. Additional side structural pieces can be fitted into the cockpit frames. These parts are very precise and may even hold securely without glue, but adhesive can be applied once alignment is confirmed. The goal at this point is to assemble all structural cockpit elements that share the same base colour so they can be primed and painted together. The cockpit structural components can now be primed. A dark primer such as black works well as it naturally preserves shadow in recessed areas. Several small details require metallic or brass coloured finishes. These include pipework and priming pump details. Painting these first, then masking them before applying cockpit green simplifies the painting sequence and keeps colour boundaries clean. The rear cockpit sections and certain framework areas are silver rather than green, so these should be painted separately before final masking and colour application. The instrument panel should also be painted black and given a gloss coat in preparation for decals. The glossy surface allows the very small dial decals to be positioned accurately. Before painting the cockpit interior colour, small equipment units mounted to the cockpit sidewalls should be installed. These include environmental or defrosting equipment and emergency systems. Fitting these parts before painting avoids glue marks on finished surfaces and allows them to be painted in place for a more integrated appearance. Once installed, the cockpit structure can receive its cockpit green finish. Applying this as a light, controlled coat preserves subtle shadow and depth in the structure beneath. With the cockpit framework painted, the rudder pedal assembly can be installed through the previously prepared pivot holes. Because the holes were opened slightly earlier, the pedals should slide into place cleanly without damaging paint. The retaining crosspiece can then be installed above the pedals, securing the assembly without excessive force or adhesive. At this stage, repeated dry fitting of the cockpit into the fuselage halves is recommended. Confirm that the upper fuselage closes cleanly and that no gaps appear along the spine. The instrument panel carries a large number of very small decals representing the cockpit instruments. These should be applied carefully over the gloss surface and allowed to settle fully before sealing with a semi-gloss or satin clear coat. Once complete, the instrument panel can be installed into the cockpit structure. Proper seating here is essential, as misalignment can create gaps along the upper fuselage join. The undercarriage control assembly can now be painted and installed. This unit contains multiple colours including cockpit green, black and brass or copper pipework. After painting and decaling, the assembly can be inserted into its locating points within the cockpit. Another full dry fit of the cockpit inside the fuselage halves should confirm that the upper fuselage closes cleanly with no interference. Attention now turns to the pilot seat assembly. The seat frame side and rear structure are assembled around the seat shell. The Spitfire seat was made from a resin bonded composite material, so it should be painted a reddish brown tone rather than metal. After painting, a gloss coat prepares the seat for decal or belt installation. The kit seat belts, although slightly thick, look convincing once installed and visible from above. The armour plate is fitted to the rear of the seat, and the completed seat assembly is then mounted to its cockpit bulkhead attachment points. Care should be taken during installation as the fit is tight. A small voltage regulator unit is assembled and installed onto the seat structure to complete the rear cockpit assembly. Installing the seat assembly into the cockpit tube, all mating edges should again be checked to ensure they are free of paint and lightly sanded if necessary. The seat module should snide into the cockpit frame snugly and squarely. Once the alignment is confirmed, it can be glued into place. The remaining rear bulkheads can now be installed. One bulkhead has clear locating features and will naturally align correctly. The other must be positioned carefully and checked visually from the rear to ensure it sits square within the fuselage. With both bulkheads installed, the fuselage halves should again be test fitted. The nose and spine should close cleanly with no gaps, confirming that the cockpit structure is correctly aligned. Additional rear cockpit braces and antenna mounting structures can now be installed and painted silver. The shoulder harness should be threaded through the slot in the rear bulkhead. The belt ends may require a slight thinning to pass cleanly through the slot. Once fitted, the belts sit naturally and convincingly within the cockpit. Finally, the control column assembly is constructed from its painted components. The two-part design allows the grip wiring and details to be painted separately before final assembly. At this stage, the cockpit and fuselage interior structure are fully assembled, aligned and detailed. The fuselage halves close cleanly, confirming that the cockpit tube geometry is correct. And this completes part 1 of our Beyond the Basics Spitfire Mk.IXc Flying Dray build. In the next episode, we will move on to the wing structure, armament installation and external airframe preparation. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so you don't miss the next part. We'll see you next time.